Good morning, everyone. I'm Sibi Sudhakaran, and on behalf of IBPC, a warm welcome and a very happy new year to all of you, this being the first event of 2019. A good start for the year calendar. The topic of today's session is the happy human, setting personal and professional goals in 2019 to find happiness and fulfillment. It's a great honor today to host Mr. Gopi Kallayil. Thanks to his newly released book, The Happy Human, that he is on a book tour and we could get him on his way to US to stop by for one day and spend some time with us. Thank you to DC Books as well, who helped us arrange this session and also have arranged few books which Gopi sir has agreed to sign later after the session. Mr. Gopi Kallayil is the Chief Evangelist Brand Marketing at Google. He works with the Google sales team, helping customers grow customer brands through digital marketing, based at the Google headquarters at Silicon Valley. His prior roles at Google included the flagship product, which is Google AdWords. Before joining Google, he was on the management team of two Silicon Valley venture capital startups. As a consultant with McKinsey and Company, he has worked on developing IT projects in China, India, and United States. He has earned his bachelor's degree in electronics engineering from NIT, India. He holds two master's degrees in business administration, one from IIM in India and another one from the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. He's a TED Talk speaker, author, and to hear more from him, please join me and welcome Mr. Gopi Kallayil.
But today, the topic I want to talk about is around happiness. Can we get the slides up? Based on my first book and what the IBP also asked me to speak about is goal setting as we get started in 2019. But in many ways, I might not be the most qualified person to talk about happiness because of something that happened on October 3rd. It was a Wednesday. So October 3rd was going to be my biggest day as an author. My book had come out. I was going to be interviewed on ABC television in San Francisco, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Instead, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I was not in the TV studio. I was in the emergency room of Stanford Hospital on a stretcher with an IV in my arm, rapidly losing consciousness. I had devolved to become the unhappy human, and I did it to myself based on how I'd lived my life the previous 12 weeks, traveling to 9 cities, 4 countries, energized by a lot of projects. So that was a wake-up call for me, the recognition that happiness is something that we control, and if we mismanage it, we can pretty rapidly devolve into unhappiness as well. I was talking about it to Dr. Chandrika as a medical doctor, the fact that based on how we take care of our physical health itself, we can be mentally, physically, emotionally happy or unhappy. So the first question is, how did I end up writing a book on happiness and why call it The Happy Human? So I want to tell you a story of how the whole concept originated. I was walking down the Google campus one morning with my mentor and coach, Stuart Newton, and I was a little agitated, a little unhappy, given that I was obsessing about performance feedback and climbing the career ladder, and about the title I had in my role, etc. As business professionals, all of you will probably identify at some level. We're all ambitious, and the benchmark by which we measure our happiness and our success is based on what levels we've accomplished and what titles we are given at work and outside. So I was a little obsessed about it and talking to my mentor. And at one point, Stuart stopped me and said, Gopi, you got this all wrong. Let me ask you, you're so obsessed about what level, what title you are in your job. What title did the Dalai Lama give you? And the reason he had asked me that question is I had actually met His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, a few months before that in Dharamsala in India. And I thought about that for a minute. And it struck me when I had met the Dalai Lama that here's a man who has nothing in the conventional sense. As a monk, he has no money. He really has no power because he lives in exile in Dharamsala. He's supposed to be the secular and temporal head of Tibetans and Tibetan Buddhism, but all that has been taken away from him. And yet, when you meet him, what strikes you is a sense of joy, a sense of happiness. Even when you watch him speaking on TV or something, you always notice it. It is remarkable for a person who does not have anything in the way we measure our lives by. So based on that, I told Stuart, the title I would want the Dalai Lama to give me is The Happy Human. And Stuart stopped, put his hand on my shoulder and said, Gopi, let me tell you this. Happy Human is a higher title than Senior Vice President. Because the Senior Vice President wants to be happy and does not know how. And I thought that is so profound. I actually changed my name card and I was handing it out to some people today, where below my name it actually says The Happy Human, because I decided that is the highest title that anybody can achieve. And much of our life is really around the pursuit of happiness. And I thought about this, saying all the things that we chase in our life, whether we're trying to get levels or titles or money or accomplishments, it all pivots towards 2 or 3 things. And I asked myself the question, what are those things that I'm really going after underneath all of my ambition and pursuit and where I put my energy? What is driving us fundamentally in our life? And for me, I concluded my 3 highest values are these 3 things: happiness, freedom, and peace. Nothing magical about it. This is pretty universal. Most human beings anywhere in the world will say this is what they aspire to. We all want to be happy. We all want to be free. And we want peace. Peace meaning we want peace inside, peace of mind, and we want to live in fairly peaceful surroundings. And if you ask any human anywhere in the world, they'll all raise their hand and say, yes, these are 3 things I aspire for also. So I started asking myself that question. As I make my life choices on a daily basis, on an annual basis, where I spend my energy, who I meet with, what kind of activities I pursue, is it optimizing for these 3 things? Is it going to make me more happy? Is it going to result in freedom? Is it going to give me peace? And if the answer is yes, then I choose to do it. If the answer is no, then seriously question yourself, saying, make a different set of choices. So I want to spend some time talking about the first one, happiness. The question was how? How do you pursue happiness? And there's no one universal answer. If I poll you around this room, I will get a variety of different answers, and which is perfectly okay. You search on Amazon.com, you get more than 6,000 titles. It's one of the most research written about topic. And the reason being, it's a fundamental driving force for human beings. We are all in the pursuit of happiness. In fact, it is so fundamental that it's even enshrined in the US Constitution, the pursuit of happiness being a right that is guaranteed to every citizen in the US. And that's the extent to which the founding fathers of the country even had thought about it. So I spent some time thinking about it. What makes me happy? What are the kind of things that I can do in my life? And as 2019 starts, what are the choices that I can make? And in the book, I talk about a number of different ways by which I stumbled my way into happiness for myself. And today, I'll talk about maybe 3 to 5 of those principles in the, given that we have a short time frame. The first of it is a simple concept, 5 principles I want to talk about. The first of it is a simple concept called take your meds every day. Now, Mr. Shetty runs a big medical, not one, 117, I think he told me, around the world, Center of Medical Facilities, and I was talking to Dr. Chandrika. And anytime you have a health issue and you go meet her or one of the practitioners, medical practitioners, they're going to say, here is a set of medications and take your meds every day. And this is what the doctor's advice is. To restore your health back to normal, take your meds every day. And for happiness also, there is a set of meds that you have to take every day. But the meds for happiness is not little white pills that come in a bottle. Instead, as I was thinking about this, I realized that the experience of happiness has to come through this portal. What I mean by that is, our happiness is experienced through our mind, our brain, our body. This container is the filter through which either we are happy or unhappy. There is no other experience of happiness outside of this filter. So ask the question, how do I keep this container through which I experience happiness in a peak state, in an optimal state? And the answer was to take my meds every day. So what do I mean by take my meds for happiness? For me, the daily meds stands for these four things. Okay, so it's not white pills, M for meditation as a daily practice, E for exercise, some form of moving my body, and D for diet, not as in dieting, but really I'm talking about nourishment here, because the type of making certain choices in what you put through your mouth makes a fundamental difference in how you feel, how your brain feels, and whether you're happy or unhappy or not. And the last one being sleep. In fact, I'd violated many of these rules leading up to the point when I had ended up at the Stanford Hospital, especially the last one. And this is the worst as business professionals. We feel we can compromise on this, and each day we try to sleep less and less so we can get more things done. And maybe a week or two we can do that, but what I found my own personal experience is if I'm not sleeping 7 to 8 hours a day, then very rapidly this technology, this inner technology deteriorates, and I would have devolved into unhappiness, no matter how much I accomplished or accumulated outside my life. So this is the first of those principles. Take care of your meds, simple enough to say, meditate for 20 days, move your body, whatever that means to you, walking, swimming, running, playing games, yoga, for at least 30 minutes every day. Diet is a simple formula follows, eat things that grow on plants as opposed to made in plants, meaning factories. So eat things as close to its natural state as possible as opposed to things that processed food that comes from a factory. So simple rules like that. Today, Jacob was asking why I always traveled with a water bottle. Last time he saw me at the Sharjah Book Fair also. And a simple concept that you'll follow that doctors will tell you is about hydrating enough. So in a typical day, I try to drink 4 bottles of just plain water so that I get about 100 ounces or so. So rules like that you learn and adapt when it comes to deciding what you put inside your body. And then the last one, sleep, being 7 to 8 hours. Fundamental things, everybody has control over it, and if you take care of it, it changes your happiness quotient. The second thing that I want to talk about, the principle, is to have some sort of meaning and purpose in your life. What drives you? Why do you do what you do? What is our fundamental driver in terms of the choices we make? Every day we are doing something with the life energy every year. So now that you're beginning 2019, there are some choices you made as to what you're going to accomplish this year, personally, professionally. And ask yourself the question, why? Where do I get meaning and context? So I'll give you a couple of examples of what I mean by that. So you can turn around and ask me, what gives me meaning and context in the role that I play at Google? 13 years I've been in this company. And for me, the meaning and context that I get from my role comes from a simple premise that comes from my background. So my roots go back to a very small rice farming village in Palakkad called Chittilanjeri, near a slightly bigger village called Nemara, which is more recognizable. How many of you ever heard of those places? Yeah? Mr. Shetty, yes? Yeah. So Palakkad, Nemara. So that's where my grandparents were poor rice farmers tilling a plot of rice paddy, just slightly bigger than maybe what this room and the foyer occupies. So there were marginal subsistence rice farmers in Chittilanjeri. This is where my parents grew up also, as the children of 2 rice farming families from Chittilanjeri and Kunisheri, both in Palghat, just walking distance of each other. And they had a very modest life. Since many of you assume are from Kerala, will probably relate to this. So they had a very modest village life. They grew up without electricity. They grew up without running water. They don't have a college education. They just received 10 years of schooling in the village school, up to what we call, or I think back then was called SSLC, right? And their education stopped there. But they had aspirations for their 4 kids, just like parents anywhere in the world have. And thanks to those aspirations, their 4 kids, that is me and my 3 siblings, we went on to get 10 advanced degrees, including 2 from US Ivy League business schools, even though my parents had never set foot in America. So we are often asked the question, what caused that kind of social mobility in one generation? It is simply access to information. But when we were growing up, it was very slow access. And I still remember I took an 8-hour train journey, from the engineering school where I was at NIT Trichy to the nearest big city, Chennai. I took the Rockford Express for 8 hours so that I could access a physical copy of the US World News Guide to Graduate Schools in order to decide which universities to apply to. I needed the information, and I took an 8-hour train journey. Today, 8 seconds on the phone seems too long for us. We can't wait. When I go back to the village, Shidlangeri, as I do every year, and look at the school where my mother studied, it looks pretty much the same infrastructure-wise, except for one difference. And this is a story that is playing out across tens of thousands of villages all over the world. It's not just in Kerala or in India. You can see a similar story happening in Ghana or in Peru or in Siberia. And that is kids in any part of the world, in very remote rural areas included, if they have access to the internet, maybe even through a phone, and all of the services we are building at Google, now have access to the same amount of information as somebody who goes to Harvard University. They can watch every single TED Talk. Not only, even if they are not able to afford the $10,000 ticket price for a TED Talk. And not only can they watch the TED Talk, even if they don't speak English, it's auto-translated into a language that they might be able to understand. They can watch a National Geographic video of underwater sea life off the island of Galapagos, even if they live in Nepal, which is completely landlocked. This is the democratization of information that has taken place. In an era where information is like oxygen, we are leveling the playing field for information. And that is what gives me my meaning and purpose every single day. And it's a source of great joy. So I find joy through my work saying, ultimately, this is what it's leading to in every part of the world. And this is what I'm asking you to think about. For some professions, it might be easy. Again, I'm using Dr. Chandrika multiple times, and I've met a few other medical doctors as well. As a medical doctor, it might be easy because you're healing people, you're curing, and you can find direct meaning and purpose and find happiness. But what if you are in an unusual, difficult circumstances? What if you are in a very tragic kind of situation? How do you find meaning and purpose? It's easy to say, I work at Google and I've democratized information. And I want to tell you a story that I found human beings, while researching this book, in the most difficult of circumstances, still finding meaning, purpose, and finding the pathway to happiness. And the woman I want to talk about, one of the two I want to talk about, is a woman called Sunita Danwar. She's from Kathmandu, Nepal. So 2 years ago, I traveled with a group of colleagues from Google to address the issue of sex trafficking in Nepal. We were trying to see if we could use the technologies available at Google to detect and prevent this very pervasive and pernicious problem of sex trafficking that takes place, of young women being whisked away from Nepal and ending up everywhere from Calcutta and Mumbai to even this region as well. So Sunita Danwar, she runs an organization called Shakti Samuva. And this is a background. When she was 12 years old, she was duped away from her village with the promise of a job in a big city, and the family trusted the broker who was promising this, and she ended up in the sex trafficking trade in Mumbai. And for a 12-year-old girl, that is traumatic. And I heard directly from her what she was subject to, she and a group of other girls that had been whisked away into this situation. And eventually they were rescued by the Indian government and returned back to Kathmandu. They're 13 years old. When they got back to Kathmandu, the families refused to accept them. There was a lot of shame and social prejudice associated with it. The families did not want them back. So here were these girls sitting and crying, 13, 14 years old, in a shelter in Kathmandu, having gone through such a traumatic experience in their life, and nobody wants to accept or receive them. And it is at that point Sunita made a decision. All of 13 years old, she said, we will take care of ourselves. If there is nobody to stand up for us, we will do it ourselves. And she formed an organization called Shakti Samuva. Shakti as in power, Samuva as in group. So it's a women's empowerment organization. And now she's 31, or when I met her, she was 31. She's 33 now. She runs a pretty large advocacy organization. And when I visited this place, it's a shelter where she now brings in other girls rescued from similar situation, houses them, and rehabilitates them. And there were more than 100 girls that she had housed. When she started, she had no resources, no money, not even a sense of how she's going to do it. But having been through the situation, she found meaning and purpose, saying, I want my life purpose to be to create an environment where no other young woman will have to go through this trauma. And now she's a fierce force of nature. When I met her, she had just come back from New York City, having spoken about at the UN, and she has the credibility to speak through it, having lived through it, and now working with so many other young girls, right? So that's what I mean by even under such difficult, tragic circumstances, I've come across human beings who redefine their lives and find meaning and purpose. And through that, from trauma, she has found a way to happiness. And what struck me when I went to this Shakti Samoa shelter in Kathmandu were all these young girls who had also been rescued, but they were happy. They found safety. They were being protected. And they're being inspired because all the women who work there have been through a similar situation. And they have become role models for these other young girls. So I'm asking you to challenge yourself and say, find meaning and purpose in what is it that you do, because you need that fundamentally to get to your pathway of happiness. The third principle I talk about is a simple concept of live a full life. Give yourself permission to live a full life. So for years, given how I'd been brought up by a fairly conservative middle-class family in Kerala and what I'd been told in terms of education and career, etc., I just swam in a simple lane. You have to get your degrees, then you get a job, and you do this and build a house. There is some standard formulaic way. And there's no question of straying outside of that in terms of travel or exploring life. When I got to Google, I looked around at my colleagues who came from all over the world, and I found many of their lives really incredible, interesting, and colorful, and what it is that they were doing. And I asked myself, why am I living this very narrow, straight-jacketed kind of life? So I gave myself permission. And nobody needs to give you the permission except yourself. And I said, I am going to explore in many different directions. One of them was travel. And prior to that, I had not traveled that much, but I set a goal saying, I'm going to do 50 by 50. I want to get 50 countries before I turn 50. And I started traveling any country around the world, and I covered all 7 continents, including Antarctica. I was determined to get there, and I've now gone to 57 or so. Something as simple as travel, as exploring, and getting places as far away as Mongolia and Cyprus, and or going to the Kumbh Mela and traveling in this region, or doing projects in the Gambia and West Africa, etc. So that's just one example. He said, I can live a full life. But there are other things that I had explored. So traditionally, my own career was limited by the kind of things I studied, engineering and math and technology. And I was a straight-jacketed, left-brain person just doing rational analytical things. I was comfortable with spreadsheets and numbers, but never in the creative side. For some reason, my family did not encourage it. There's nobody in our family, our extended family, is completely devoid of creative talent. There are no musicians, no writers, no singers. But I said that should not stop me, and let me start exploring creative pursuits. And in my 40s, I started teaching myself because I saw my colleagues around me. So once I gave myself permission, things started happening. One of them was speaking. Speaking is a performing art. And I started pursuing speaking very seriously and getting up and growing this skill, learning, finding coaches and tutors to the point, and I'll say this not to impress you, but impress upon you what is possible when you get yourself permission. I started competing in something called the World Championship of Public Speaking, and 4 times I've been to the semifinals, including this past year in Chicago, where I finished in the top 20. It's an unusual pathway for somebody who studied in a small school in Kozhikode. This is where my life begins, right? And I'm just using that as an example to say, give yourself permission to live the life you want, because our life should be treated as one giant experiment that we are conducting with ourselves. And I want each of you to think of your life as one giant experiment. even if it means failing, even if it means trying to speak in public despite being embarrassed about it. Whatever direction you want to take it. And the other things similarly that I've gone on to do is writing 2 books and getting it published. And completely devoid of musical talent, I said, what stops me from learning it and singing? So I started pursuing that as well. And I've released 2 music albums, and the last one was actually on the Grammy ballot this past year. So this particular principle of finding a way to happiness, what I'm asking you to do is challenge yourself and say, what does it mean to live a full life where you give yourself permission and don't be constrained by what others are telling you or what you might be telling yourself, the stories in your head itself. What would you put down for 2019 that you dare yourself to do that you have not done ever in your life, but you might have wanted to do? Doesn't matter whether you're going to succeed or fail. All it matters is that you tried, and even if you fall flat on your face, that will actually be a pathway to happiness because you're living a full life. The 4th principle that I want to talk about is, I call it walk towards the storm. And what I mean by that is, it's all well and good to talk about happiness and success and accomplishment and all that, but our lives are not so simple. All of our lives, one thing is guaranteed. There's going to be death, there's going to be disappointment, there's going to be disease. Those are not pleasant, happy moments. How do you deal with it? My father passed away a year ago. He's the hero of my life. How do you find happiness when a loved one passes away? And this is just a fact of life. People you love and trust may let you down. They'll stop loving you. They'll betray you. The people you know will die. You could be subject to debilitating chronic disease. Others in your life. These things are going to happen. There is no avoiding it. So what is the formula for happiness when this is how life is set up to be? Because everything is not going to be pleasant. There's going to be difficult times. There's going to be tragedy. And as I was thinking about it, one of my mentors at Google taught me about the American bison. The American bison is famous for one thing. When storms approach, winter storms in the plains of Montana or Idaho, etc., all the animals in the wild flee. They try to run away from the storm, except the American bison. And when it sees a storm coming, the American bison actually turns towards the storm and then will walk into the storm, because it knows if it walks into the storm, the sooner it walks in, the sooner it will be out of the storm. And this is how it survives storms. And I found that story fascinating. I found that example fascinating, and I said, I can't avoid these problems coming towards me in life. This is guaranteed. This is the one guarantee in life, that I'll have difficult situations. But rather than fear it or turn away from it, I can turn towards it and walk towards the problem and actually embrace it and treat it like a challenge. I want you to think of an analogy that I will leave you with, which is when we go into an ocean, for example, for the most part, either we may not be swimmers or maybe just like modest swimmers. If the conditions are stormy, all of us leave the water. We play it safe. We don't want to be in the ocean in stormy conditions when the waves are big. Except for surfers. Think of what surfers do. For the surfer, the bigger the wave, the more the thrill. In fact, surfers as a community have this communication network where they tell each other the big storm is coming off the coast of Indonesia or in the Pipeline Beach in Hawaii. And they'll actually fly to it from another city or country, chasing the storm. They want the biggest storm so they can have the thrill of riding a 100-foot or 150-foot wave. And we can approach life using a similar metaphor where all these problems that come to us, we treat it as a challenge, where we learn something, where we grow, as opposed to something to fear. No matter how unpleasant and difficult it is, have that surfer metaphor. Surfers actually don't run away from the big wave, they go towards the big wave. In a similar way, when these problems are sent to us, given to us, what is it trying to teach you? And in responding to the challenge, and when you respond to the challenge with grace and dignity, you will find a certain pathway to happiness. And I'm not saying this just to kind of be preachy about it, and this is through actual testing and iterating and real life experience. And now I've reached that stage where a big problem comes up, I say, bring it on. I want to face it and walk towards it in a similar way where the mountain climbers seek the tallest and most challenging of peaks. And there's a certain thrill that they get out of it. The fifth principle that I want to talk about, and then I will spend a few minutes on goal setting, since the organizers asked me to speak about that, is what I came to the conclusion after talking to many people who have researched happiness and my own experience, etc., is ultimately, in the book I call it the happy human, and it's for a reason I chose that. What my conclusion was that the pathway to happiness is to really essentially embrace your humanity. It is through our human condition that we find our pathway to happiness. And that means who we are as a human beings with all of our imperfections and insecurities and our human relationship, our connections, and our ups and downs and joys, and just living on a full life and manifesting our truly human experience is really the pathway to happiness. So whatever that means to you, ask yourself the question, what does it mean for you personally to be fully human, to embrace the human experience of birth and death and relationship and joy and success and connection with others and compassion and maybe even like occasionally sadness and disappointment and tears. All this is part of the human condition. Even accepting the fact that we'll be born, our bodies will get healthy, it'll deteriorate, eventually we'll die, and at 80 or 90 we won't have the same kind of physical capabilities as we had at 20 and 30, and rather than feel insecure about it, just accept it and prepare yourself to live with it with grace and dignity. So embracing the fullness of the human experience is the other principle I talk about. The more you can embrace it, the more likely you are to find your way to a certain level of happiness. And the more you resist it, the more you're going to struggle with it. Now, there's no one definition to these kind of concepts. I talk about my own personal experience, but I want you to find your own pathway to it. Again, going back to the basic concept I mentioned, treat your life like one giant experiment as you come up with your own definition of what happiness means, what makes you happy, and trying and testing and iterating all of this. With that, I want to stop talking about the principles of the book and segue for a few minutes as Sybil and others told me to talk a little bit about goal setting. So this is 2019 is starting. And the question I was asked to address is, how do you set your goals personally? How do you set your goals professionally? And then through that, what is the pathway to happiness as well? So how many of you have set goals for 2019 at any level at all? Raise your hands. Okay, about 3, 4 of you. How many of you want to do it? And for this year, before the second or third week gets in. Yeah, there's enough evidence that if you set your goals, you're more likely to hit a lot of them. You have a certain true north, or you have a compass that directs you for the rest of your year as well. So I'll talk a little bit about how I do it. I finished mine. I usually do it in the last 2 weeks of the year. In fact, sitting in Bangalore, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Sethi, you're from Bangalore? Yep. And that's where I usually do it at the end of the year. I go to a retreat there. So my own goal setting process consists of the following bits and pieces. At the top level, I do have an overarching life goal that I wrote 14 years ago. It fits on one sheet of paper. It's like my mission in life. And the reason I wrote that is at that time I was doing a startup company in Silicon Valley, and my company had a business plan. Any company needs a business plan for it to operate in a very predictable, consistent, focused manner. And during a stressful period, as I was trying to build up the startup company, I took some time off to go stay in a Benedictine monastery, in a retreat center, to give myself some time and spaciousness in my life. And as I was sitting there, and it's a beautiful place overlooking the Pacific Ocean on the mountains, and you spend all the time by yourself, so you're in silence, you're in a contemplative state. As I was sitting there, it struck me, my company has a business plan, and I had no plan for my life. I was just lurching from one crisis to another. Whatever was put in front of me, I was reacting. And I didn't have a sense of direction or purpose. And I said, how is it possible? This is ridiculous. So I decided, I spent the entire weekend writing my personal business plan, or I call it my organizing principles of my life. And I also decided I didn't want it to be 200 pages. Our life should not be so complex that you need 200 pages to define it. I wanted to be one sheet of paper. I said I should be able to fit what my purpose of life is on one sheet. So I sat and wrote down an interesting exercise, and I would encourage you to do it. And that sort of defines my long-term goal. Year after year, it does not change because it's consistent with, it's like a 50-year life plan for me. And then every year at the beginning of the year, I actually write down a 2 or 3 page document listing what is it that I want to accomplish this year. And here again, be free form and creative of how you want to define it. It could be an essay, it could be bullet point. For me, I center it around 5 dimensions of my life that I try to focus on all the time. And the 5 dimensions being, first is spirituality, as in who I am as a human being, what is my meaning and purpose in life. Second is around family, family as in the 100 people in the world, need not be blood relatives, 100 people in the world who are most meaningful and significant to me. How will I connect with them and engage with them through the year? Third is around health. And for me, health is not simply physical health, mental health, emotional health, financial health, and spiritual health. Multiple dimensions of health that define an overall healthy human being. Fourth, I talk about professional passions. Whatever is it that you do for professional self-expression. So for someone, it might be manufacturing. For me, it is the intersection of business and technology for greater good and that's the work I do at Google. And fifth is personal passions, the things you do because it gives you great joy, not to make money or to become famous, but these things you love. You can call it hobbies or passion. So I write my annual goals around these 5 things. What do you want to accomplish this year around those 5 dimensions? So that sort of gives me a 12-month roadmap. And then I take that, and on a weekly basis, I look at that plan and say, what can I get done this week? And I write it down on a Sunday, so then that sort of brings my life to a more practical week-by-week chunk. And I do use a tool called the Productivity Planner I discovered last year. If you want tools, it's actually just a book 2 guys created by looking at all the different productivity principles. And finally, on a daily basis, the night before I write down, what are the 5 things I want to get done, like today, I know very clearly in my head. And that gives me like a 24-hour focus as well. So that is my personal goal-setting process. And feel free to adapt any of it, but have some sort of a process because taking the time to take a step back from the everyday, fast-paced, overscheduled life that we all live, to ask yourself, what is it that I want to get done in the long term, say on a 12-month basis, and then finally breaking it down to a week or day helps on a personal level. I was also asked in the last 5 minutes, I'll just talk about how do you set professional goals for your company, for your team. And I'll tell you the method that is most effective and successful that I've found in my career. It's something we use at Google, and it's easily copyable because there's a whole book that has just come about it. It's called this book, Measure What Matters. So this is John Doerr, who wrote the book. John Doerr is a venture capitalist at a very, very famous venture capital firm called Kleiner Perkins. And Kleiner Perkins is probably one of the top 5 venture capital firms in Silicon Valley, and famous because they invested in Amazon, in Yahoo, in Google, Sun Microsystems. So there are very few companies that got it right so spectacularly. And John was the person who led the investment in Google. So early days of Google, he introduced this system called OKRs, and that's what he talks about, how Google, Bono, and the Gates Foundation rocked the world with OKRs. OKR stands for Objectives and Key Results. Objectives and Key Results. And the way the system works is, at the beginning of a quarter, so today's my first official day back at work, or yesterday, even before I get back to the Google headquarters, and probably on the plane, my 16-hour flight back to San Francisco, I will write down my objectives and key results for this quarter, January, February, March. Not only do I write it down, so I state clearly what is it that I am going to deliver for Google. It's very measurable. It's all numbers based, that I will accomplish this task, and here's how we will know if I'm successful, grow revenues by this percent, or deliver or meet with 62 clients and accomplish these tasks, whatever it is. It is then made public, meaning if you go into the Google intranet and you work at Google, you can look up my OKRs, and I can look at each of your OKRs as well. So there's transparency, so we don't hide behind secrecy here. Everybody's OKR is publicly available. All 80,000 employees at Google, I can go look at their name in the directory and see what is it that they are committing to. This ensures a self-accountability, because if you have to go public with your goals, you make sure you work very hard to deliver on them. And then let's imagine that this is actually a team, and what is your name? Santosh, right? And let's say Santosh is the leader of the team. Santosh then takes each of the individual OKRs and aggregates it at this team level. So now this entire team understands what Santosh as the manager and this team is committing to deliver. And it is synchronized with every person's OKR because it's a build-up. And then let's say this front row is an entire division, and let's say the leader of this entire division, the director is Dr. Mohammed. Dr. Mohammed then aggregates each of the 4 teams' OKRs at that level. So now that is established and it's publicly viewable. So if somebody, what is your name? Richard? Nikhil, yeah. So some point, middle of the quarter, Nikhil is still confused about what is it that I'm doing with my job. Does it actually tie into what the overall division is doing? All he has to do is to go look at Mohammed's OKR, and all of a sudden he can course correct and calibrate. So it's a self-regulating system. And this rolls up all the way up to Sundar Pichai. And at the beginning of the quarter, in a couple of weeks from now, Sundar will stand up in front of the entire company and say, here are the OKRs that every group is committing to. And I, as a leader, am also committing to the company. And the head of Android will present, that Susan Wojcicki, the head of YouTube, will present. So OKRs are a very powerful way of goal setting across the company that provides consistency so that everyone is marching in the right direction, and you can self-regulate and self-monitor. So I want to close off the presentation. Maybe we'll have time for a couple of questions or so. Going back to the core topic of happiness. Happiness is a fundamental human right. It's as fundamental as breathing is. We all deserve to be happy. And as you go into 2019, I would say raise your hand and earn that right if you're not already are, because we all deserve to be happy. And if the way we are living our life, or something or some events around us is denying that, then stand up and speak up for it. Make those changes that are needed, because as much as breathing is fundamental, it's like we need oxygen, we need happiness as part of our human condition. But how you get there, there's no one set path. Different human beings will arrive at it. I talk of some of the things in my own book, but I want each of you to find your own pathway to it and make your life, treat your life as one giant experiment as you work your way towards happiness. And never forget the fact that each of us is unique and so special that it's incredible that throughout human history, 100 billion human beings have walked this planet. There are about 7.4 billion estimated alive, but a total of 100 billion human beings that have lived and walked around on 2 feet, just like you and I have. And yet, there has not been one repetition of this 100 billion people. There's not been one other person like Santosh. There's not one other person like Nikhil or Dr. Mohammed. How is that? How is nature so incredibly creative that it didn't stamp on another human being that looks exactly like us? And that's how unique and special we are. And I want to close off with that by honoring and acknowledging that unique humanity in each one of us. And I wish you all the best for 2019 as you find your own unique pathway to happiness. Thank you for having me here.
I want to find a way of knowing what genuine happiness is rather than superficial happiness that might go into the zone of naivete.
Yeah.
If you think of happiness as a clearing in the woods, you've got to go through the woods to get to that clearing.
Correct,
So going through the woods is what we get quagmired in. So how do we stay happy even as we go through the woods?
Yeah. I mean, it's easy. I'll use two examples. Superficial happiness is really very temporary and usually external driven, and things that give you validation. Right? You buy a Tesla car, you think it'll make you happy, and maybe it will for a few days or hours, and then as soon as your neighbor gets a more glamorous car, you become unhappy because feel morally inferior. Whereas you said superficial happiness, and what is the other one? Genuine happiness. Genuine happiness is much more intrinsic and long-lasting. And a perfect example of it is the kind of happiness that a mother gets, the bond between a mother and a baby. And whether it's a baby's smile or baby's well-being or the connection that the mother feels when it holds a baby, that is genuine happiness. And that's why I said it comes from not an externality like a physical thing you own, but as part of your human condition. It comes from that nurture, that sense of connection. And this is my own understanding and definition. But as I've been saying throughout the talk, I want Ms. Mahalingam for you to come with your own definition and understanding of this. Experientially, you should feel and know the difference between superficial happiness and genuine happiness. And only you can actually come up with the definition for yourself.
I am Bharat Murthy.
Sorry, what's your name again?
Bharat Murthy.
Okay, Bharat, hi.
When it comes to goal setting,
Yeah.
I mean, you are confronting with a tremendous amount of imponderables, variables, uncertainties, global scenarios. So many a times what happens, goal setting becomes rather a bigger joke that when you come across after 3 months, the entire thing goes haywire. How do you review, how do you confront the situation and reset goal setting on a constant dynamic basis?
And that is perfectly normal and natural because there are only so many things that you can control. One thing you can control is set that goal, but this you're assuming so many things that oil prices will be at this, or the world economy will, or so-and-so will win the elections. Things change all the time, right? Okay, that kind of uncertainty and impermanence is a part of the world. And when it changes, then you adapt the goal. Because goal setting doesn't mean you're carving it in stone, and once you write it, you are completely rigid. No, you can change it. What is the frequency? 2 or 3, every month you go back and check it to see. It's the same like steering a ship. If you've gone off course because conditions have changed, then you find a detour around it. Again, the metaphor I use for my personal goals is I set a goal and you have to flow like a river towards the goal. And when the river hits a rock or a boulder, the river doesn't complain. The river says, oh, I hit a rock. It's not going to stop and says, there's a rock in my path. It finds a direction around the rock and continues flowing. Treat your personal and professional life like that. You set a goal, you're moving in a certain direction, you are going to hit big rocks, big mountains you're going to rock. Somebody's going to drop it on your path. Find a way around it or change and go towards a different goal. It's your choice. Right. Thank you very much. I'll close this off, but I'll be available for personal questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. May I request you to please stay back, and I would request our president, Mr. Suresh Kumar, to please come on stage.
IBPC is happy, in fact, very happy, that we are starting the year with such a thoughtful, mind-blowing, I think mind-blowing is a fairly violent expression. I'll keep it as mind-blissing session this morning. And, it confirms to me, and certainly I'm sure to all of us, that, this is the reason why we're so proud that Silicon Valley, Google, Microsoft, etc. have leadership of Indian origin, that are truly, this time I would use the word mind-blowing. Please give a full round of applause. I think we all need to set goals, otherwise we won't know where we are going. But more importantly, I don't know about whether the Dalai Lama did, but we are certainly happy that we have a happy human amongst us. Even if he is otherwise known as the evangelist or senior vice president. So thank you very much, Gopi, and I appreciate your joining us and also doing a book signing for our members. I would now invite our distinguished governor, Dr. B.R. Shetty, and Mrs. Chandrika Shetty to come on stage to greet and also to hand over a memento. Please do join us.
To be more healthy.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Under any circumstances, be happy, smiling face. That will make you more serene, and endorphin will come from your brain, and you will be more serene. Thank you.